But anyways, we had a set of neighbors that lived there first, which this is not what they're about, but I'm just going to give you a little background. It was a family, a husband and a wife and their kids stayed in the apartments next to us. It was a 2-bedroom apartment. And they would fight all the time. I mean, they would go at it. One day my husband wasn't there. I think he was at work or wherever. At the time he was my boyfriend, which y'all know. But he was at work or something, and the woman and man were outside arguing. Next thing I know, she's running around, chasing him around the car with a knife. And I'm just looking at them and I'm like, Lord, please don't let nothing happen and I be a witness to this. But eventually the man gets in their vehicle and he drives off, and things stop. But later on they end up moving away or moving out of the apartments. I don't know where they moved, but they moved out of the apartments. And a man moved in. He was about a older guy, I would say, depending on what you think is old. He was about mid-50s, something like that. When we would see each other, we wouldn't speak. He wouldn't say anything. We wouldn't say anything. We would just go our separate ways, just see each other in passing. So I kind of had an idea of what he looked like, but I didn't know anything about him. Disclaimer, my dad worked for a prison. And one day I ended up seeing the new neighbor, walking into his house. As I was walking out, he had on a prison uniform, work uniform. And I remember seeing his name. It doesn't give your first name. It gives the first letter of your first name and then your last name. And I remember seeing a D and then his last name. But of course it was the same uniform that my dad had, so I knew that he worked at the same prison as my dad because that's the closest prison to us anyway. So I remember one day I was talking to my dad and I was like, hey, there's a guy that moved next door to me and I think that he works with you or in the same facility as you because he had on the uniform. And my dad was like, what's his name? So I was like, I told him the last name, which I don't remember the last name, but all I knew was the first letter of his name was a D. So, funny fact, my dad was like, oh yeah, I know him. His name is D. We're gonna just say his name is D. But that's not his name. Crazy thing is, his first name was the exact same name as my dad's. But for the sake of this video, we're gonna call him Mr. D. So he's like, yeah, his name is D. And I was like, y'all got the same name? He was like, yeah. People always have to make sure they're talking about the right person at work because we both have the same name. And the last name started with the same in first. My old last name started with the M. That man's last name started with the M too. That was that. My dad just said, yeah, he knows him. And my dad said, he's a preacher. And I was like, oh, okay, He didn't have a wife or a girlfriend that lived with him. He just was him. So I didn't think anything of it. So, like I said, we would still see each other. We never spoke or whatever like that. So I'm assuming after I talked to my dad about him, I'm assuming my dad seen him at work and was like, hey man, you stay in the apartment connected to my daughter. Well, time goes by, which my dad catching up on our shows. I don't know if you guys watch like Love and Hip Hop and things like that, but we would watch stuff like that at night. We would catch up on our shows, and then we would go to bed. There was never any fighting or anything like that. And disclaimer, my husband is not even the type to argue and fight. Like, I could literally go in there right now and be like, why didn't you take out the trash, yada 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 yada. He's gonna ignore me. He's not gonna argue. So, and on top of that, when we moved there, we were in the puppy stage. Like, we were so in love. Well, I still love my husband, don't misunderstand me, but we were so in love. So I'm just like, why would he make that up and say that we'd be fighting? And then on top of that, you know, when you first get in a relationship with someone, which we had been together over going on 2 years by then, but we had just moved in together maybe within that year. But I'm just like, you know, when you first start dating someone, my mom and dad is still getting to know him and things like that, and it's like, why would you put that bad taste in their mouth, making them think like we're fighting or he's abusing their daughter? Like, that's not cool. So after that, I just started thinking about, like, yeah, he's weird, because you're supposed to be a preacher and you're telling these lies, just making up lies or whatever. So as time go on, me and my boyfriend start to notice that he has like a little bitty baby. I'm talking about like the baby looked like about 6 months. Like, we would be leaving or coming and we would see him with the car seat with the little baby in it, and it was his baby. And I'm thinking to myself, like, he's a preacher and he's not married. Why does he have a little baby? That's unusual. But at the time, we were just speculating. I didn't know anything about this man other than he worked with my dad and he was a preacher and he was a lawyer. I knew that much. So anyway, we would see like a woman come drop the baby off or a woman come pick the baby up. So back then, I didn't know what I know now, but he could have easily been divorced, like, and the wife was pregnant and had the baby, and now they're not together. But anyway, mind you, the man was like 55, I would say, and had a little bitty baby, and I did some digging. He had an older daughter that was older than me, like she was like in her 30s. So I'm like, why would this man have this little bitty baby or whatever? And you know, he has adult kids. But you know, different strokes for different folks. Whatever. I just mind my business, even though I'm still wondering, because now you've made it my business by lying on me. But whatever. So time goes on or whatever, and I'm pregnant now. Now I'm pregnant. So one day I tell my husband, I'm like, or my boyfriend. I keep calling my boyfriend my husband, but he was my boyfriend at the time. You guys know. But anyway, I'm just gonna call him my husband because he's my husband. So I tell my husband, I'm like, I'm tired. I'm gonna go in the room and lay down, because we were sitting in the front room. I was like, I'm gonna go in the room and I'm gonna lay down. So I go in the room and I lay down, and like my bed was like, this is the wall and this is my bed. So I'm laying in the bed because I used to sleep closest to the wall. So while I'm laying in the bed, I like hear a woman's voice and a man's voice talking or whatever they was doing. Use your imagination. So I'm just like, what the world? So I get up and I go in there, because mind you, he's a preacher. He's not married. So I go in there and I'm telling my husband about it, and we're laughing, giggling, like, yeah, that's crazy, whatever. So I go on back in the room and I get in the bed because, you know, okay, it's funny, but whatever, it's not my business. So I get back in the bed and I eventually doze off. And if you've ever been pregnant, you know, like, don't interrupt a pregnant girl's sleep and don't mess with a pregnant girl's food. So I'm asleep. It feels like no more than like 30 minutes of me being asleep. And my husband comes in the room. He's like, hey, get up, get up. I'm like, what? He's like, get up. It's a woman beating on the door. I was like, what? So I get up. He's not talking about our door. So apparently the preacher is in the house with the girl, a woman, whatever. And there's somebody beating on his door, like, let me in. I know you got a girl in there. I know you got a girl in there. And like, me and my husband are peeping at the window, like, what? Like, really? Mr. Preacher Man is having a whole triangle thing going on or whatever. And you could just hear him like, man, get away from the door, go home, get away from the door or whatever. And she's like talking crazy to him through the door and banging on the door and telling my dad about it, and my dad and me like laughed or whatever. My dad's like, that's crazy. And I was like, yeah, because he lied on me, but he has his own crazy thing going on, and he's a preacher. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't look at every preacher that way, but I do know that some aren't what they seem to be, and he was one of those who wasn't what he seemed to be. After that, I would just see him in passing still, and I want to say he had like a crazy look on his face, because I'm pretty sure at that point he knew that we knew that he had some craziness going on over there, but he never told any more lies. And like, that was the beginning of my pregnancy shortly after we moved, because I ended up finding a different apartment that I could afford while pregnant or whatever. But which leads me into the bonus story. I'll go ahead and tell the bonus story. Oh, I'm sorry, y'all. So when we end up moving to our next apartment, because me and my husband stayed in an apartment when we first got together, and we stayed in another apartment, and then after that we moved into the house that we live in now, that we're buying. But so we moved in the second apartment once I was pregnant, and I would say the first year was good. We didn't have any issues. The neighbor, we stayed on the top. It was a apartment complex. This one was. We stayed on the top, and the neighbors up under us, she was about my age. She had like a 1-year-old, and she was pregnant. She was really cool, you know. I still see her to this day. We didn't have any issues. So eventually, I guess she decided to move, and I'm sorry, y'all. Like everyone knows, when you lose your good neighbor, you're bound to get a bad neighbor next. So this girl moves in up under us, and like, her vibe was just off when I would see her. It's like she always had this look on her face, like she was just looking for something to get stirred up, like she just wanted to stir up some stuff. So one day, my husband and his friend was sitting on the couch. I'm sorry, what am I talking about? They were sitting on the steps, you know, the steps that lead up to our apartment. And she goes, you can't never get no sleep around here. The upstairs neighbor's always making all this noise. Mind you, she knows that my husband is the upstairs neighbor, and she's just making all these subliminals, like saying things, but she's not really saying them to anyone, but she's on the phone talking, so she knows he hears it or whatever. Mind you, I paid, back then rent was much cheaper. I was paying like $400 for rent, which back then that was a lot, because things weren't as high as they are now, but back then that was a lot. My husband had already previously heard her say that she pays $13 in rent. Yeah, it was base income apartment. So anyway, back to my husband and his friend sitting on the step, and she goes, I can't never get any sleep because the upstairs neighbors and da 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 da. So you know, my husband's not gonna say anything to her, because of course he's not gonna be arguing with this girl outside or whatever. So when my husband gets in the house, he tells me about how the girl says she never gets any sleep because of her upstairs neighbors. By then, my baby was 1, and then my bonus daughter was like, they are 7 years apart, so my bonus daughter had to be like 8 by then. So, you know, they're kids, they're gonna run around and play or whatever. So, you know, I didn't think anything of it, but I knew that was weird, and I felt like she was gonna start some drama. So one day, I'm coming home from work, and she's sitting on the steps, and I'm like, oh my God, you know, I gotta pass her to get up the steps. She's sitting on the steps, and I'm like, oh my God, what is she finna try to say? Because I just felt the vibe every time I seen her. So I'm walking up the steps or whatever with a couple of grocery bags, and she goes, excuse me. And I said, yeah. She says, can you get your kids to stop jumping around and running? They're knocking the pictures off my wall. I said, I looked her up and down, and I walked off. Who are you talking to? Like, I'm not telling no kids to do nothing. There's a better way to come at me like that. You don't come at me like that. Had she not made the little comment that she made with my husband sitting outside, I probably would have, you know, approached the had kids of her own. She had small kids of her own. So she should know how you tell a child to sit down and stop running. You may tell them to stop running and sit down, and then they still, in the next 5 minutes, jump back up and start running again, or whatever, you know. So it's just like, you should know, out of all people should know how that is. And, you know, no, I'm not telling them to stop anything. And at that point, I didn't care about all the Dollar Tree pictures falling off the wall. Oh well, put them back up. Oh well. But anyways, y'all, that was the story time of my two neighbors, which I've had way more situations with neighbors, not with me personally, but they're different situations with neighbors, and I would just be looking out the window, hearing it all go down. But that was the two situations that happened with me personally with the neighbors. Other situations was like not my business. I was just kind of looking out the window, watching it. Like, I'm telling you, when I moved in that second apartment, the trauma in that second apartment complex was so bad. I didn't even need cable. I had cable, but I didn't need it. All you had to do was sit and look out the window or sit on the steps, which I didn't sit on the steps because, no, I was a home person. I was always in my apartment, but all you had to do was literally sit on the steps or look out the window, and you would see all kind of trauma. But the crazy thing is, the last straw for me was somebody got shot in that apartment complex, and I was coming home one day with my kids, and I see all these polices in the tape and all of that, and I'm just like trying to get through, and the police stops me. He's like, you can't go through. And I'm like, what? Just imagine you just got off work, of a hard day's work, 8 hours, 12 hours, whatever, and you're being told you can't go to your house. So I literally had to just sit somewhere and park for like an hour until they start letting people go to their apartments, because someone had got shot. They didn't pass or anything, but they did get shot. And then after that, me and my husband was like, no, it's time to go. This is not the environment for us. This is not the environment for our kids. And plus, of course, we didn't never plan on living there long term anyway, but that was just what put the fire under us. Like, no, it's time to go. But I'm pretty sure everybody that had one of those crazy neighbor stories, whether it was them being crazy with you or just crazy in general,